Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 130, The Value of an Outsider with Robyn Hilger. The American Choral Directors Association is the largest organization of choral musicians in the world. ACDA sets the tone and direction of choral music in the U.S. and has a major impact on the global choral music community as well. The newly appointed executive director of the organization, Robyn Hilger, seeks to usher in a new era for the organization, and hopefully leading to a bright future for choral music. Now, Robyn Hilger is not a choir person. She's learned a lot in the last year about choir, but she does not come from that background, and we will talk about that quite a bit in this first part of the episode. It is my belief that the needs of the community of choral musicians have changed since ACDA's founding. I also believe that ACDA has a bully pulpit in communicating about and advocating for the direction of the profession. This makes their decisions intimately woven into the lives and livelihoods of their members. It is no secret to anyone who's followed this show or its content over the years that for that very reason, I have taken ACDA to task for many decisions that I think are detrimental to the profession. And to Robyn's credit, she knew that before she agreed to do this conversation. So we were able to hash out some of those disagreements. And the great news, though, about Robyn is that I have discovered in getting to know Robyn that even though she is not a choir person, she, I believe, is the right person for this job because she is interested in how this organization serves its members. She might not make every single decision that you or I agree with for the rest of the time that she works for ACDA, but I can tell you that she will do it because she thinks it's the right thing. And she has a refreshingly open approach to discussing and talking through problems and has a great systems thinking mind. And I think you're going to really enjoy listening to her think through and discuss through some of the challenges in front of her. In this episode and the next one, you will hear me discuss the past, present, and future of choral music in America with Robyn and how ACDA will help to shape it. I drove all the way from KC to OKC, that's Oklahoma City, to record in person, which I think is very helpful, and I think you'll enjoy that dynamic, especially if you head to the YouTube channel and watch the video version. In the first part of this two-part interview, we discuss the purpose or reason for being of ACDA, and how changes are made, how conventions are planned, and the importance of member engagement and feedback, and lots more. It is my strong belief that there is not a better tool out there for teaching music literacy than SightReadingFactory.com. Now, the way that you use it matters. That being said, it is so efficient, so easy, and so cost-effective that I strongly recommend that everybody goes and signs up for it if you have not already. Get a membership for every single one of your students, and I don't care what level of choir you work with. It's usable and helpful for everybody. So go to SightReadingFactory.com. When you get all of your membership, enter Choralosophy at checkout. Every time you renew, you'll get 10% off. And of course, don't forget to head over to Choralosophy Patreon group, which is patreon.com/Choralosophy, and sign up for $3 a month or more and support financially the recurring costs of doing the show. It really, really helps a lot. The producers at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrika Igrain, Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Robyn Hilger.
Hello.
Here we are. Actually, you tell everyone where we are.
Sure. We are on the campus of Oklahoma City University. I have been on campus for 2 days as the clinician for the 7th grade North Central Honors Orchestra. I'm a graduate of Oklahoma City University, and so we were scheduled pretty tight. So it's nice to be able to home base it here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful room, and it's very comfortable, and so we're all set up for a great conversation. And of course, since I've got my camera on, can they see your shoes in that camera? Make sure you lift them up. Oh, yeah, because that's going to have to go.
There you go.
Shoes. Yep.
You have to have great shoes as the conductor. That's how it works.
Oh, yeah.
I do have other shoes in my backpack, though, just to be clear. These may not make it all the rest of the day.
That's acceptable. I will not criticize you if you change shoes. Well, Robyn, I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you. This is going to be really fun. Let's start out by just getting a little bit of the biographical out of the way.
Sure.
Who are you, and what led you to be doing what you're doing now with American Choral Directors?
Sure. So I'm a native Oklahoman. I was born here in Oklahoma City. I started band in 6th grade. It was my elementary music teacher, Kathleen Reynolds. She still is here in the city. She's in her 90s. She's a very well-known music teacher here, but she was my favorite teacher in school. And she is the one who told me that I could be good at band. And luckily she didn't tell me to jump off a bridge, because I probably, that's how much I liked her. And no one in my family has a music background, really. So when I came home and declared to my parents that I was going to be in band, this was like a real shock to them. But I knew, really from the first day of sitting down in band, that I would be doing music for the rest of my life. And almost instantaneously, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I graduated with my undergraduate degree in instrumental music education, and I went into the field right here in Oklahoma City Public Schools, the largest urban school district in the state. And I taught in Oklahoma City Public Schools for 9 years, band and strings. And I accidentally went into administration. This is kind of funny, Chris. I still sometimes am shocked that I am an administrator and not a teacher all day. It seems like a weird trajectory to me, because I really didn't mean for it to happen. In 2006, I was named the Teacher of the Year for the state of Oklahoma. And here in Oklahoma, if you're the Teacher of the Year, you're on sabbatical for the year. And you travel the state as the ambassador for education. This is a pretty daunting experience because, as a teacher, I was teaching middle school. That's my area, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, band and strings. Those are my people. I love 7th graders the best. And then all of a sudden, you're sort of like lifted out of your school environment, and now you need to like be at the Capitol, talk to Rotary clubs, go to a university, and give a lecture or those kinds of things. It was a really great experience. I think I'd be a much better Teacher of the Year now. I know a lot more now than I did then. But I made lots of contacts, and I spent a lot of time in the community. What were people talking about in their communities when it came to just education, period? Not only music education, but just education, period. And I just turned around out of that experience and went back to my school. And I had been doing work with the foundation here in town, and I had some friends there, and they had an opening, and a friend of mine said, we've got an opening. I said, oh, okay, who are you going to hire? She said, you. I was like, no way, dude, I'm not coming to the foundation. I'm here, I'm at school, I'm doing that. Well, then, a couple weeks later, she was like, we have a new director. I really think you guys should meet. So I did. And when I came back to school, I said to my principal, I think I had a job interview. And she said to me, if they offer you a job, Robyn, you need to go. And I was like, what? My mom is kicking me out of the nest? What is happening here? And she says, they haven't ever had a teacher on staff there. They have millions of dollars of resources to invest. And if they would give you full scope to be able to do some things, you should go. You should do that. And so I did. So ACDA was using a firm. I have no idea how they found me. I still don't know to this day.
That's interesting.
Because I had not applied into the initial pool here. The recruiter called. He asked me if I was aware of the opening here in Oklahoma City. And of course I was. It was on the job board. Yeah. It was out there. And, he was sort of like, is there a reason you haven't applied, or do you have any interest in applying? And I actually said to him, well, I don't actually have the profile of maybe what you would consider to be the ACDA executive director. And he said, what if I told you that the board maybe prioritizing some different skills in their search than being a choral director, and those kinds of things. And I said, oh. I always wanted to go back into arts administration. I think because I had a very good job here in Oklahoma City, it made me a little bit fearless in the search process. I felt like I could really be who I was.
Nothing to lose.
Take it or leave it. Yeah. Say it how it is. And so I entered the search process. I felt good about it when he sent me the candidate profile. I felt like I had had the experience to be able to answer some of the questions about working with volunteer leadership and financial leadership and all of those kinds of things. And I think that it helped that I had a background working in diverse communities, leading projects, specifically in inclusion, equity, justice, reform. And every time I met with the search committee at ACDA, I liked them more and more. I liked them more and more. And after maybe the second call, my husband said to me, he said, man, if they offer you a job, he said, you're going to take it, aren't you? And I said, well, I think so. He said, you guys are just laughing. He said, you're just having the best time on this call. And I said, I really am having the best time with them. They're talking about things that are really important to me. And they're talking about things that are important to them, that they would like to see happen in the organization. And I think that I might have some ideas about how to do that. And here we are, Chris, 1 year and 2 months later.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So that's the story. That's the great Genesis story.
Yeah, that's great.
The director who didn't mean to be a director.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. MyMusicFolders.com has the absolute best choir folders. They also have a new MyPad folder. So it's a folder for an iPad, which is all the rage right now in choral music. And you can also get a discount there when you shop for music folders and a variety of other classroom supplies at MyMusicFolders.com. Enter Choralosophy at checkout. Okay, so what do I say, or what would you say, because this is kind of going right out of the end of your story there with your first conversations with ACDA, where you're actually discovering that they're making the intentional move away from a choir-specific person, right? And so then, of course, there's the membership out there who might not know that conversation was happening, and then they find out she's not even a choir person. So how do you explain that to people, and how do you make them feel better that you might not understand what we go through?
Sure. Well, what I would want what I want them to know is I actually got asked in the interview process, so you're not a choir director. So I think that there are a couple of things about that, Chris. First of all, the executive director's position is not an artistic position.
Right.
So the skill set, a choral director may have the skill set, but I'm not sure that being versed in the entire history of choral repertoire is the daily activities of the executive director. But because I am an instrumentalist, because I am a music teacher, I'm not going to be asking choirs to perform in hotel ballrooms. Let's slash the budget and make everybody perform in a hotel ballroom. So it's to our organization's advantage that I know the experience of what it means to be in an ensemble. I know what it means to, be in a rehearsal. I understand that synergetic experience when that 2 + 2 is 5, right? Within my own experience, but it's probably more to our advantage that I can read the financial reports in the afternoon.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I've always been very clear on in any of my roles as an administrator has been, I don't feel the need to know everything. Sometimes the best thing I can do is put more people in the room who know more about it than I do. That's actually the best thing that I could do as the administrator. So when we have artistic things come up that need to be addressed, I don't need to address those from my position. What I need to do is make sure they are addressed. But oftentimes that looks like convening groups of people that have other experts.
Right.
So I try to operate with a pretty like low ego around those things. Like I really, I'm intensely curious about it. I've probably gone to more choral concerts in the 1 year and 2 months that I've been with the ACDA than in my entire life.
I bet. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I have tons of friends who are in choir, who are paid singers, in churches here, and all of those kinds of things. It just has not been an experience that I've had, but I have a deep appreciation and respect for the art form. And like I said, my own experience as an artist and a musician maybe regulates kind of what could end up being kind of the, I guess maybe what the impression of like an administrator would be, you know, unfeeling, budget slashing, all in the spreadsheets all the time. You know, those things only tell you so much about what the actual experience is.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I, for one, when you were hired and had not met you at that time, my first reaction was the opposite of the one I brought up. I was playing devil's advocate, but I was actually glad that you were not a choir director, because my first thought was, well, that's probably an appropriate decision, and I was unaware at the time too that was intentional on the behalf of the board or the search committee. But the reason I thought that was a good thing is because sometimes one of the best things for an organization and or for a group of people is to have a slight amount of emotional detachment being provided by someone who doesn't have a preconceived notion of what that ecosystem is already supposed to be like. Does that make sense?
It does. I've found it to be a real strength and a real weakness, right? I think those things are always a double-edged sword. So from a strengths perspective, I don't have a sacred cowness about anything or anyone, right? The reaction of some of my friends the first time they saw Andre Thomas's name come up on my cell phone, we were at brunch. I try to not have my cell phone on the table, but I did, and I was oriented a different way, and they were like, and I was like, oh yeah, it's just Andre. Right? I mean, like that.
Right.
And it's probably the same thing about like how ensembles are named, or the composers that are in the field, or what is the structural approach to the conference planning, or any of those things. It's, I think the board, all the volunteers have given me really a lot of flexibility and a lot of grace to just ask all the questions. And I literally say, it's just a question. This is not a value judgment or any of those things. But I think I have had an advantage to say, why is it this way? Or what are the other alternatives? Or is there a reason that we're not exploring these other things? On occasion, I will really step in it because I don't know enough about it. And then I will be more educated. People will take the opportunity and they'll say, listen, it's that way because this. I say, oh, I gotcha. I gotcha. But to have the grace of everybody in the field, and for the investment of time that people have made in me to help me learn, explore, entertain all of my questions, has been very beneficial to me, but I hope that it's been beneficial to the organization and will continue to be.
That's great. That's great. How would you describe, so now that you're a year and 2 months into the position, and let's say somebody from also with no choir background, where you're in an airport bar or something, and somebody says, hey, what do you do for a living? And that you say, I'm the executive director of this organization called American Choral Directors Association. And then the person says, oh, well, what do they do?
Yeah, usually they think usually they think we're talking about the ocean.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
And then I'll say like choir.
Like
and
choir
they say,
directors.
oh, choir.
Right.
What's so interesting, Chris, is usually the conversation, the second you say, no, like choir, you usually get, oh, I was in choir, I sing in choir, my child is in choir, And people really start talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And often I try to explain our work through whatever story that they've said. So if they're telling me about their child in school, and I would say, well, it wouldn't be unusual for your child's teacher to be a member of the association because we serve K-12 teachers. Or if they talk to me about singing in their church choir, I might say, well, your organist or your music and worship leader might very well be a member of ACDA because we serve music and worship leaders through repertoire, resources, professional development, networking, right? And they say, oh, then I'll say, usually ask them what they do. I'll say, well, do you have a professional association? Often they do, accountants, or say, it's like that.
Yeah.
And people really get it.
Yeah.
But I really, in trying to explain it to people, what I found is people have their own stories about it.
Right.
So,
yeah. Now, has your thinking on the purpose of the organization evolved in the year that you've been here? Like when you conceive of why ACDA exists, how would you explain that to even to members?
Yeah.
What is the group? What is ACDA for?
Right. Well, and as one of the newest members, because I joined, and it was really important to me to do that, like pay my dues like everyone else. And it would say, okay, so here I am, a new member. So what is here for me, right? Yep. And you look at the journal, you look at the conferences, you look at those kinds of things. But quite frankly, Chris, and this is not new news. Since leadership conference in the summer, I've been talking to leadership about what I'm calling the other 360 days of the year. We know what we're doing 5 days a year at a conference, whether you're a region conference, national conference, state conference, whatever it is. We already know what's happening there. We're very good at it, all of these things. But what is the bandwidth of all the rest of the year? So instead of thinking that somehow we can't cover depth, breadth, scope, whatever it is, just because we can't jam it into 5 days, that is a confining paradigm that we've put on ourselves, that these things have to happen this way. And particularly with the launch and the adoption of technology through COVID. There was a time where people did not want to be online anymore, right? Please no. I'm all day on Zoom. I'm not going to another Zoom webinar or any of those things. I think the bandwidth around those things have changed and are starting to change because people's face-to-face and in-person cup is being filled, which opens up bandwidth in all of these other areas.
And your attitude changes about it when you're not being forced to do it.
100%. The other thing is that the on-demand nature of learning, we're in a field where there is a very specific date and time that things have to happen. A rehearsal only happens when the group is there to rehearse, right? But the rest of our learning and engaging does not have to be that defined. And you see this in all kinds of other sectors. I mean, you can get entire degrees now without ever setting foot on a college campus or attending a class at a specific time. The workforce is going this way as well, which is people who work remote. They might work early, late, weekends, whatever it is that they do, because they can shift these things around in their life now. And there are parts of our work that are limited by time and space together, but that's not the entirety there. So when you talk about the purpose of ACDA, I think that it's evolving, or the actions to enact the purposes are evolving. Because we're seeing, for example, when we talk about access, well, traveling to faraway places is an access issue. It's an access for kids trying to go to honor choir. It's an access for educators whose school districts don't pay for it. It is a barrier for nursing mothers. It's a barrier for people who are caretaking family members and all of these things. And if we don't think more expansively about how people can remain connected to the profession, we're probably not going to be around as an association all that long, because people are able to pick and choose out of their life now where things plug in. And I think that ACDA should have offerings across all the seasons of a professional's life. But in order to do that, we're going to have to take up all the bandwidth of the year. Some things might be in person, some things might be virtual synchronous, some things might be virtual asynchronous, some things might be written, maybe it looks more like discussions, blog posts. I think podcasting is a great way that these things are happening, conversations are happening. So evolving. Now, from the purpose of ACDA, and I think that this is really important, Chris, the purposes of ACDA are defined in the Constitution and bylaws. So we don't have to guess what ACDA is about. Now, it's an entirely another conversation to say, should ACDA be about those things, or are there more things? Are there more things?
Or less things.
Or less things, right? Or different things.
Yeah, right.
Or different things. So I actually brought something for you.
Okay, good.
Because one of the tools that members have is the Constitution and bylaws. This is understanding, instead of saying, why isn't ACDA doing X, Y, and Z? The answer would be, well, maybe what does ACDA say they do? Then, of course, you use every bit of policy within an organization to make the changes that you want to see. So I actually brought you not only the current purposes, but I brought you, hot off the press, approved for public comments,
Okay.
the edited language coming to the ACDA purposes.
Wow.
That's coming out of the task forces. So this will be public probably within the week.
Okay.
It'll be on the ACDA website. The bylaws amendment process right now is it starts with the task force, which is chaired by Edie Copley and Lynn Gackle, Mariana Farha, Tim Westerhouse, Vic Oakes, Peggy Detweiler. That's the task force. There was a time, more than a year ago now, it was just before I came on, that National R&R chairs, standing committee chairs were asked for input on changes, and this went into the task force. I have experience with bylaws review and changes. So instead of just doing like a one and done, send it out the door, I made a recommendation that we break it into parts to make it digestible. And as part of the review process, it would come from the task force to the national board. Once it was through the national board, it would go out for public comments to the membership. This is the time to say, this is great, I hate this, what about the next? I mean, literally, it's going to be in a Google form. Please, everybody, tell us about the changes. The public comments go back to the task force and come back up through the review process. We already saw in round one that there were some recommendations about what is in the Constitution versus what is in the bylaws and these kinds of things. I was like, man, this is exactly why you have public comments. This is terrific. And it gives the membership a chance to see things before you have to make a decision on it. And I think that that's critical, not to just sort of be like, here's your 30 days notice, take a vote, but to really get the information out so that it's more transparent. It's not secret. The bylaws are the bylaws of the organization. They belong to the members. And for more people to get eyes on them than just the working groups. So round one went out for public comments and has already been pulled back in. The round two and round three edits are coming up, like I said, within the next week. The national board just approved those a week ago to go out. But I brought you
Cool.
a copy.
One of my favorite ways to get repertoire is digital and PDF. My two favorite places to go, my first stop, are ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. I go there first if I need something quick and I need something digital. But the great thing about those two websites is that the quality of the craftsmanship is incredible. The composers, the care that they put into the editing, it's top notch. And of course, 10 years ago, if you get music digitally, you probably weren't getting a very good editing product. Nowadays, that is just not true. So head over to graphitepublishing.com, ryanmain.com. When you make a purchase there, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout to get a discount.
But when we talk about the purposes of ACDA, they're there.
Yeah.
In writing. And there's lots of work that's been done with editing on language choices, which I think is so important. Like, for example, how do we define choral excellence? Everybody's favorite term, choral excellence, right? Yeah. You're going to see an attempt at clarity in the purposes of what does that mean? What does it mean to say music and worship rather than religious or spiritual settings? Because of the implication of worship is within a church, but not all religious or spiritual activities take place as a form of worship, if that makes sense. So everything's a work in progress, which you see, I think, is probably one of the best attempts.
Yeah.
And again, it is not in stone, so it needs to be very clear. Nothing has been done yet, and in fact, nothing can be done until the membership votes on it. But when we talk about who ACDA is, what is the purpose, it's actually defined. But that I don't think that we have to be chained to our foundation either. Organizationally, we should always be open to that conversation. And the membership has the ability to take action on those things through, all of their region presidents up into the standing committees, as far as what is important within the membership.
Right. Yeah. So this is great. This is really fun to get a chance to look at this, especially live. But it's interesting. So I've talked about quite a bit about, since you brought up the example of the just choral excellence concept. I would be one that would throw out the possibility that maybe we don't have to have an agreement about what that is.
I think I would agree, because what is excellent for seventh graders is different than what's excellent from a community choir, which is different than what music that might be just being made in the home versus an auditioned choir at a university. I guess it gets into that, right? What is the Supreme Court's definition of pornography? When you see it.
Right. Yeah, I always I think about it like I don't need to agree with you on your definition of excellence or anyone else. I draw the line at you just have to have one. Like you got to have one, especially in the education setting. But mine's not going to be the same as yours, and that's okay. That's beautiful. Like and in the choir world, I think about that a lot, because there are so many different versions of what choir means to different people. There's show choir, there's chamber choirs, there's the large concert choir type format, there's jazz choirs, there's gospel choirs, and because the traditions in all of those different areas are so different, the standards and the definitions of what excellent they're all going to sound different, and they should. And so I think we get ourselves in the weeds a little bit when we try to come up with a definition of excellence that applies to all of those, because that's a fool's errand.
Well, and I don't think, and you were talking about this recently, Chris, we were saying, one of the most important things that we can do to people is make sure that they have a competency in the content. And I wholly agree with that. Hands down, I wholly agree. And I would tell you, I would even go even further, which would say, particularly in communities that are marginalized and in other places where people are surprised that excellence exists or that competent performance exists, this is a problem.
Yeah.
This is a problem. And with our Systema program here, we determined very early on that we were going to train at the absolute highest capacity. We were going to provide the highest quality sequential music education that we could provide. And we had to do that because if we didn't, no one else was. But we also did it because we said the worst thing anybody could say about our orchestra is, well, isn't that great for those kids? And we were absolutely not going to put our children in that position.
Right.
That we wanted every door to be open to them, but we did not have to. I think sometimes it's like people feel like that you have to choose. Like, oh, you're either having fun or you're learning content, and these things, like learning content, being excellent in what you're doing, having a great performance, is fun.
Yes.
That is fun. And in fact, being part of something that is not engaging, that is not robust, that is not challenging, that is not any of those things, is actually not fun. Nobody sticks around for those things because it is not fun to be part of something that is not
there's no substance.
Giving to you. It's a flash in the pan. You have early adoption, but you have no sustaining. And even in all the work that I have done in non-auditioned ensembles, in the school district here and everything else, the students always rose to the challenge. And in fact, they were hungry for it. They would come to school early, they would stay late, they would move heaven and earth for it.
Yeah.
And that was fun. That was fun.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think you don't have to sacrifice content for fun. You don't have to sacrifice fun for content. And I think when that conversation kind of devolves into like an either or thing, that we're really like missing the boat.
Yep.
But this is like when we talk about excellence, what performance practice of the Western canon, there is a standard for that. We know what it is. We know what it sounds like, right? Well, now let's talk about the gospel choir. It's very different, but we still know, you still know when your world has been rocked by a gospel choir.
Absolutely.
It's different for the 5-year-old baby bumblebees. It's different. And yet, in all of these places, we know if there's competence, we know when they're confident, we know when they're engaged, and all of those things like equal fun, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, yeah. Nobody wants to be on a team that's losing. Nobody wants to be in a choir that's bad. Nobody wants to be in an orchestra that's bad. You can make them appear to be fun for a short amount of time. But most kids are smart, and they know when the work that they're doing is not quality unless they are forced to live in a bubble and then they don't know any better. But I had that very formative experience when I was my very first job teaching, where I followed into a relatively large suburban high school, but a program that was in shambles. I was the 4th choir director in 5 years at this school, and this was in a community that had a crosstown rival high school. And at my school, their choir was an absolute joke because they had been awful for the last 2 or 3 years. And the reason that those kids knew that it was awful is because all their friends from church and from sports and stuff were in the choir across town that was excellent. And so they knew that that what they were doing was not high quality, and so of course they were quitting, in droves. And my job, of course, was to come and get them to come back. And so yeah, I know you're absolutely right. And I think the thing that I wonder sometimes about ACDA, and this has gone back from well before you got there, and I'm interested in your opinion, is that there is sometimes amongst membership. And the impression that, in fact, I'm looking at this document here, and there's a lot of the purposes, and people can go on the website and look at them too, and of course participate in your call for comments. But there's 14 items here, and a lot of them definitely kind of touch on the things that make my job what it is, which is to teach kids to sing. Teach kids a high level of musicianship. Teach kids to read music, to be literate musicians, and all of these things are wonderful. Like, I don't even know that I would change much of any of this outside of the semantics of just words here and there. But what's interesting though is I think some of the frustration of members that I've been hearing for years is that sometimes we feel like I think we touched on this earlier, that unless we are at the convention, or unless we are using our ACDA membership number to plug into a form so that our kids can do all-state choir, there's no real reason to be a member. And I think that comes out of kind of a historic lack of understanding what it is that we do every day, and that what we might need to be fed and supported in doing through ACDA. So I think a lot of people think of it as an organization that should be about providing professional development for us to become better at what we do, and being challenged in that way when we go to conventions. When we go, and I think all the things you talked about, wanting to incorporate more stuff throughout the year, all of those things are wonderful. And I think, I just wonder, and the other thing, I'll throw this out there and I want to get your reaction, is the other frustration that happens a lot is there's a sense that ACDA has historically been very higher ed driven and higher ed biased, even though that can't be a high percentage of the total membership, just because of knowing where the jobs are in the great hierarchy of all that is choir. So have you been presented with any of those concerns already, and what do you think about that?
Yes, so all day, every day. I think one of the first best things that happened for me as the executive director is to be out at the region conferences. And as you know, because we met in Southern,
right?
Anytime people were stopping me, my job at the region conferences was to be there with people. I sat for a long time in hotel bars just talking. What is it that you do? What have you been doing in ACDA? What do you see? How is it going? So I would say, hands down, that the perception that collegiate level SATB choir is the pinnacle, it exists. Now, I haven't been here long enough to tell you, for example, how I think we got there. But what I can tell you is, I think something that even happens within teachers, and this is what I would liken it to. I've spent my entire teaching career at middle school, but I can't even count the number of times that people ask me when I was moving up. Somehow, I should be moving up, whatever that means, right. Moving up. And we have got to get away from that. So, one of the purposes is about lifelong music making, which means that it's on a continuum. And I've said this a lot, we don't grow collegiate level singers in the garden and go pick them out of the garden. Right. The only way they get there is through high quality sequential music education all the way through the pipeline. And what we have to have is everyone firing on all cylinders at their point of connection with students along the choral continuum.
And understanding what is developmentally necessary at that age.
And that then it moves beyond collegiate level because it moves, I think, beyond collegiate level, particularly into places of worship and into community choirs, because all of us that are having this conversation, that are doing this for our job, we're the exceptions. We're not the rule, and we should never forget that. Yeah. That the majority of people quit before they got to where we are, and the majority of them will quit after their high school or college experience.
Right.
So I think that we have to remain humble in what it means, and I also think that we have to have insight for the fact that how we feel about it is the exception. And think of the millions of people in the world that have quit their fine arts experience. Now, there's all different reasons why that happens, and I don't believe that actually everybody should love music the way that I love it. Some people love sports, some people love to write, whatever it is. I want them to have their thing. But this the choir bug, people get the choir bug at all different points in their lives. If you think about it like on-ramps of the highway, some people get on because their families have a musical experience together. They sing in their house. They do those kinds of things, and it becomes part of who they are. Some people have a first experience like at the cherub choir at church or in their elementary school when they're first in choir. Some people get forced into the rotation at middle school, or I have to have my fine arts credit at high school. But there are all these on-ramps. But we also have to remember that at every point where there's an on-ramp, there is also an off-ramp. Mm-hmm. And so we have to nurture every piece of this from the beginning. And you know what? This idea of like moving up, well, kids get older and they gain experience. The people that we're working with, I mean, theoretically, they move up in their life, their understanding, their choral development, all of those things. But to think that somehow a teacher who has dedicated their entire life to children and youth somehow has not reached the pinnacle of the profession is really misguided. Yeah. It's very misguided. The other thing that happens in this is we're going to lose access to a lot of professionals because our life circumstances are going to start dictating who make, well, and we already see it, if it is the pinnacle, who makes it to the pinnacle. And I guarantee that it's very few women who have children. Mm-hmm. I guarantee that it is very few people who have had anything in their life that have taken them off a very direct path, right? I went from high school to college to graduate school to post-grad to da-da-da in mm-hmm. there. If you are not on this very specific trajectory, the path is not for you. And then I think, well, how many people are we missing out in the world? We're missing out on the talent that they could share, the joy of music making that they could share. And that's on the teacher professional side, and that's also on the choral participant mm-hmm. side of the house. How many people leave because they think, well, I can't do that way.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you. I think one of the things that has created that, and this, I've been a member for over 20 years of the organization, and one of the things that I've noticed throughout that time is this, and this is addressing the issue with the moving up concept. Because if it were just moving up to mean moving up in age, then no one would have an issue with that. But everybody knows that that's not what's meant when that's said, right? Everybody knows in our choir ecosystem that moving up means moving up to to better choirs and a better job, and ultimately to recognition by our colleagues for our work. And in the U.S. anyway, that the vehicle for that is ACDA. That is how people in our profession get, I guess, what in other professions would be considered like street cred or credentials. Mm-hmm. ACDA is like unless you can point to your face on a presentation poster or your face on an honor choir poster, then most people see that as having not reached the pinnacle of the ecosystem. And so I think that's what creates that perception is if you look at all those faces, they're collegiate directors. Mm. And even if it's the, elementary school honor choir, and maybe that collegiate director has zero experience with elementary school kids, but because they're higher ed, they're going to be given that position. And I think that there's a whole history of, and I think this is something that I didn't even learn until several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, just about how ACDA leadership, even at the national level, comes from being selected by one of the previous people. All of that. There's just certain things about the way the organization is structured that I think perpetuates that. Mm. And is that something that ever gets discussed? And I imagine it's probably hard for that to be discussed because it's always going to be discussed by the same people that are always at the, so in other words, if I'm a higher ed person, I'm very likely to name other higher ed people as my potential successors for the ballot, and so that's one of those self-perpetuating systems that we always talk about as being something that has to be very intentionally reflected on. Is that something you guys ever think about or talk about?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the process is codified in the bylaws. So if anybody wants to know what it is, it's there. I think that there are a couple of things that are challenging here. The first thing is when you think about like conferences and the conference schedule, or you talk about like publishing in the Choral Journal. That's another thing, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a K-12 teacher that has time to run a research project
Of course.
and do that, right?
Yep.
So some of it is, what is the appropriate level of contribution that can be made within the sector that you're working, right? So often within the collegiate sector, right, there's time, incentive, and everything else to do the research, the presentations, those kinds of things. That's why they get done that way. The other thing is the amount of time, effort, and energy it takes to volunteer with ACDA.
Right.
And I think that's why, like, maybe if you're in the very early stages or the middle of your career, you think, man, I don't want to be a region president. I don't have time for that, or I don't have time to serve at the state level, or those kinds of things. Those are very real concerns. Yes. They are at very real concerns. Some of those things, I think that the national office can do a better job of providing operational and systemic support, right? So volunteers don't have to like create systems and processes. That's done. You can focus on doing really what the volunteer could be best at, right? Rather than all this other system and process maintenance and development. I think we're making some real strides there in that standpoint. But it does become self-perpetuating, as you have said. And one of the things that I think we are going to need to continue to sort of flesh out is, what is the job description for leadership in ACDA? What is the job description for region president? What is the job description? Because, for example, I think that we might see things that look like, who's the best conference planner around some of those things right now. Except that I got to tell you, I don't call Andre Thomas to talk about planning the conference. When I call Andre as the president of the organization, it is very intense policy, governance, legal, financial. It is so not about the conference. And so when you, I think some of it is disposition driven as well. What are the skills, qualities, and characteristics for national level leadership? If you have a low tolerance for pain, this is not the place for you. If the slightest amount of conflict keeps you up at night, this is not going to be okay for you, because ACDA has a diverse constituency. There's almost nothing that everyone will agree on. Right. I tend to go with, like, maybe I've done my job if I've spread the dissatisfaction evenly.
Yeah, right.
Like maybe that's what doing a good job actually means. So I think that we will continue to see an examination of those processes, because there is a call from the membership for more opportunity to serve. So something kind of strange happens, which is there are some times that I will hear from national level leaders trying to fill, let's say, region R&R slots or state R&R slots or a treasurer's position or something. They'll say, man, I can't find anyone who wants to serve. On the other hand, I hear every day from people, if only I had the opportunity. And it can't be both, right? Nobody will serve. I don't have enough. It can't be both.
There's a disconnect there between what people are wanting to offer and what is being asked for, possibly.
Yeah, and is the ask right? Is it the right ask? And are we asking the right people? And I think that we have to have, we've started to see more, and I think we will continue to see more larger open calls for people who have an interest. The only way that is going to work for us in a really great way is, again, when we are very good at defining the skills, qualities, and characteristics.
Right.
Right? What does it mean? And I also think that there needs to be alternative paths to leadership. So, for example, if you had to be a state president, then to be a region president, then to go on the national board, right? You know what I mean? To go to the EC. What about people who have who have come up through the R&Rs?
Mm-hmm.
What about people who haven't had any of that level leadership, but are known conveners of people, coaches, mentors? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they're spending their time in these individual relationship investments, and haven't pursued a chair. Who are the people that we know would be great at service, but anytime there's a call, we don't see their application? And what I say about that is, sometimes it only takes one phone call from somebody to say, I saw this call was open and I want to make sure that your stuff is in.
Right.
And then somebody will say, oh gosh. Right, imposter syndrome is also something that's really big. Yeah. Am I good enough to be one of these people?
Right.
And the answer is, it's just people.
Yeah. Yep.
It's just people.
Yeah,
so,
no, you're
I don't know
exactly
if
right.
I don't know if that's an answer.
No,
Chris.
it's just all the thoughts that have to go into what it takes to change the culture if the culture is needing to be changed. I mean, you have to analyze all that.
We do, and it has to, we need to do it thoughtfully.
Mm-hmm.
We need to, I think we have to be so careful, because sometimes the conversation starts to go a direction where really it's like nothing about, for lack of a better term, the old guard should be here. And I actually fundamentally don't believe that. There's a reason that we study history. There's a reason that we respect our elders. There's a reason that those things happen. And particularly, we have a lot of people who experience and or age-wise might be considered quote-unquote old guard, who have a very visionary look at ACDA, who say things like, when I look at ACDA, I know that I'm actually on my way out. We're building, the organization is being built for the people who are coming in and up, right?
Yep.
There are foundational things that I think are worthy and valuable, that stabilize the organization, that you know what you're going to get, that it doesn't blow in the wind every time somebody new is elected.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's as difficult to have that much flexibility. So I think some of these changes for more accessibility, for lack of a better term, inviting people into roles. What I would hope is, and what I would want people to know who are listening to this is, answer the call. If you get the call, answer the call. You don't have to know how to do it today. We'll help you do it. But if you got the call, answer the call.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, one of the things I think we could zero in on a little bit would be, just this idea that if we want, and if the organization wants that buy-in from membership, then oftentimes membership also wants to feel that their needs are being reflected by the organization. It's a symbiotic thing. It's like a chicken versus an egg thing. It's like the organization can make a call for more volunteers, but then the people, I don't want to volunteer because I feel like the convention's not for me, it doesn't have anything for me, that kind of thing. And so I think that it kind of goes back to the higher ed criticism that I had before, but I know that the conventions for years would be a good example of this, where the national conventions can come across in ACDA as a, I'll just be colorful with my language, as a poster session for the elites, meaning they are they end up being a lot of presentations that are pretty niche, that would be things that would be getting discussed in the theoretical realm of higher ed, but are not super connected to actual human children on the ground and what they're being taught in classrooms and what's happening in choirs. So so that is oftentimes an opportunity for those higher ed colleagues to present that information, which is wonderful. But then, that's oftentimes when a lot of the membership is at the bar. Those types of things happen a lot and have been happening for years. I think this upcoming convention in Cincinnati is another example of that. I'm not sure how much that gets filtered to you, but I know with my role as, I guess, the choral music underground here in talking to the Empire, I heard a lot of frustration about the upcoming convention because there just was almost completely devoid of anything that was connected to what we do every day in terms of how do I go to ACDA convention and feel like I'm being taught and fed and challenged into things that I can take back into my classroom. So absence of things like how the voice works, vocal pedagogy, how to teach literacy, how to structure your choir, how to structure programs, the types of things that quite frankly have given me a platform because I help people with those things, and then they're coming to me, but then also feeling frustrated that they can't come to ACDA for some of those things. And I think those two things are connected in that when organizations become run very heavily by, I guess you could say, smaller groups that kind of live within their own bubble, and that is in our world, that's higher ed. And I don't want this to come across like I have a beef against college professors, because I don't. I understand. It's just a different way of thinking about the academic aspect. I kind of think of it like this. There are really important roles for people in every profession to live in the realm of the theoretical. And then there's also, and those people are very needed, but that always has to be balanced with the people who who drop the theory and just walk out and interact with actual people in the real world. And so it almost has gotten to a point where it feels like, to a lot of people, and I get this comment a lot, is that it seems like ACDA has lost touch with the other side of that, which is the practical. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of problems. The first one is the entirety of the work has been defined around a conference, and there's only so many hours in the day.
Right.
That's it. I think that if I was guessing, people's needs are best met locally. That would be my kind of like gut reaction to it, which is knowing what would support an individual teacher inherently. And when I say teacher, I'm talking about like K-12. Let's just define it as K-12 teacher at a national level. Might be pretty difficult overall because of the variety. But if that professional development is actually rooted, first of all, closer where people can access it. So if it's within my state, I'm more likely to be able to go and take advantage of it, or whatever it is. Maybe even same thing at the region level. So when I think about this and the challenges of it, I wonder, like, is there a leveling of information, right? And I don't mean this from like least important to most important. What I'm talking about is grassroots needs are best met by the people who are right there in it. That is a fundamental belief that I have. No one is going to talk me out of that. You don't go to other people's communities and tell them how to do their work. They already know. They already know how to do their work. So that's one thing that I wonder. But these are the other things that I'm talking about in the other 360 days of the year. Where's all the rest of the bandwidth for what teachers need for their classrooms and for those discussions to happen?
Right.
So really organizationally, we're really talking about capacity. Like, here's what I know. From the national office, I can't produce 360 days of content across every level, type, and kind and genre of professional that we serve. But what I do know is people are already doing that.
Right.
They just need a platform. So again, this is the systems and processes piece of it. Which
and I hear you. The problem with that, though, for me, is that ACDA, whether it knows it or not, or accepts the responsibility, has a bully pulpit and has a lot of power in projecting into the membership what should be seen as important. Okay, so and the reality is the National Convention serves that for a lot of people. Like if it's, in other words, if I'm going to try to make the argument that teaching music literacy is really important and is like a primary function of our job, and in fact that literacy, in the same way that English literacy is a tool for equity in just like underserved kids, that music literacy also is that. It is a tool for equity, and that's the argument that I've been trying to make. But then but nothing about that shows up on a national stage in our professional organization. Then it will seem like my idea, which is actually very popular amongst the membership, that's a really important thing, is almost then seen as a fringe idea. Because, well, if it was that important, there would be stuff about it, right? And then, of course, so it's one of those things where there is a kind of a bully pulpit power that a national organization has, and you're right. You're absolutely right about there being, only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much bandwidth. But then, of course, people would say, okay, sure, but are we not projecting what our priorities are to the membership by what we choose to put there? And so I think that's where some of my confusion, I guess, comes from, is that. Thank you for sticking around to the end of part 1 of that conversation with Robyn Hilger. As we continue next week, you will hear us talk more about the convention itself. What types of sessions are present and what types of sessions are glaringly missing. And then as we finish the conversation next week, you're going to hear okay, now what do we do about all this? How do we go forward making ACDA be what we need it to be for the membership? How do we engage more people that are not members of ACDA because they don't feel like their needs are being served by the organization? We talk about the dominance in ACDA of higher ed, for example. Maybe that doesn't represent the needs of people in the classroom, K through 12, et cetera. And how do we parse all that out? How do we make the Choral Journal a place that maybe is more than a poster session for grad students that are publishing research? How does this all play into our ecosystem so that ACDA can be really, truly something that we all are fed by, no matter what stage we are in our career? If you enjoyed this conversation, stick around for next week's conversation. And of course, share, leave comments. If you want to add to this conversation, the best place to go is Choralosopher's Facebook page, and you can join there. Robyn's there. You can have conversations about stuff you heard on the show, and really just about anything in terms of choral music that you want to discuss, or just get people's opinions. It's a great Facebook group. It is the most non-toxic of any choir director Facebook group I think you'll ever see. So go check it out. And then, of course, head to patreon.com/choralosophy and support there. Your support at Patreon makes this show possible, and I cannot say that in any stronger terms. I need that help for me to be able to continue to do this forever for you. And last but not least, make sure you throw that promo code in at ryanmain.com, graphitepublishing.com, mymusicfolders.com, and sitereadingfactory.com. See you next week with more Robyn Hilger.